Morning all.
Good morning.
When was the last time we did this? 17, 18 months ago?
Yeah. I wasn't desperate to do it again myself. Can you see me, Andrew?
No. You must have your video off.
I've tried to put it on and I don't. Record live, Zoom, check. Start video, that might.
Yep.
Yes.
Essentially, Di or Liz, are we good to go, are we?
We are live and ready to go.
Good as gold. Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this Finance Committee meeting of the Otago Regional Council. As I've just said off air, 17 or 18 months ago, we were in this dilemma, and once again, we find ourselves in the same situation. So be it. We just got to continue on, obviously, with the work. Warm welcome to staff, to members of the community out there watching, listening as well. Great to have you on board. As far as I know, there's no apologies. I think we've got a full turnout. There's no public forum. Sorry, Hillary.
Do we have to clear off Kevin and I first to chair the meeting?
Yes, you're quite right. And why haven't I got that in front of me? It is in front of me. Yep. Sorry. And also, I should have just touched on some of the rules of engagement about raising your hand to speak electronically. In other words, putting it up on the. You'll know better than I where to put it. And when you speak, just then click your hand off, and then make sure when you're not speaking that you're on mute. That just minimises the sort of feedback from in and around where we're all located. Only one person speaking at a time. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yes, so you're quite right, Hillary. With regards to the very first item, I need both Kevin and yourself essentially to just indicate that you are vacating the chair, and then there needs to be a motion put that essentially appoints me as chair. So if you could both indicate that you're vacating the chair, perhaps Kevin first.
Yeah, Andrew, I have great difficulty up here at times with intermittent use of my bandwidth, and we often get outages on with the internet. So I think it's more prudent that I hand over to you to chair, and that I will spend most of the time just on audio only, just to save bandwidth. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Hillary?
For me, I would like to vacate the chair and move that Chair Noon be the chair of this meeting.
Thank you. And you just want to add under standing order section 14.1.
That's the one.
Okay. And I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay. So no apologies, no public forum. Confirmation of the agenda. As far as I know, there's no changes for any reason. Conflict of interest, just the reminder that you need to be aware during these decision-making processes that as elected members, you need to declare interests or conflict of interest where appropriate. Moving on to the confirmation of minutes. These for the two finance meetings. The first one item 5.1, minutes of the 25th, 26th. That's when we're up in Queenstown. We had it over a 2-day period. 25th, 26th of May, 2021. Finance meeting. I'll move that they are true and correct or approved. Have I a seconder? Seconded Hillary. Is there any discussion? All good? I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Yep. Yeah, maybe the hands up thing is the way to go, rather than everyone then clicking on to unmuting, etc. So we'll just try that again. So everyone in favour of approving the minutes for that particular, or those particular meetings, please raise your hand. Yep, okay. Yep, it's motion's carried. Thank you. So moving on to the 5.2 minutes of the public excluded finance meeting 26th of May 2021. Once again, I'll just move from the chair of our seconder. Seconded by Kate. Sorry,
I had a question on that.
Okay, I'll just stop you there. I'll just seconded by Alexa.
Yeah.
Yep, Kate.
Sorry, is this audit and risk you're talking about? Sorry, which page are you on?
We're under confirmation of the minutes, and we're on item number 5.2, minutes of the public excluded finance meeting on the 26th of May.
And that's the bus one, is it? I'm just sorry, I can't see. I don't know. Public excluded usually is done public excluded. Sorry.
We need to go into public excluded to approve those minutes.
Very good point. Very good point. Okay.
May I say something, please? Those minutes were only, that meeting was only convened to approve the resolutions made at the public excluded audit and risk meeting. So that's all you're acknowledging. Okay. Public excluded recommendations were approved by.
Thank you.
Finance.
Okay. So everyone comfortable? Comfortable that we can deal with it here?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep. Did I miss the bus one? Sorry.
Won't the bus one?
That was council.
That was council? Oh, okay, thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, now I have got, I know Carmen's got a hand up, and she had sent me through an amendment, and I'm not 100% sure whether it was in the first minutes or the second minutes. It must be the second.
Second minutes.
Yeah.
Councillor, I've got that. I will make that change.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
So just for everyone's information, that was where Carmen couldn't reconnect, having difficulty with her internet connection as the meeting progressed. So just noting that, and Liz has got that covered. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 6, which is actions.
I'm sorry, Councillor. Did we get a seconder and a vote on those other minutes? I'm sorry.
I don't think we did vote in the end. Sorry. It was moved by myself, seconded by Alexa. All those in favour, raise your hand. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. In terms of actions, sorry, there was something there that I had to respond. Oh, okay. So under the Finance Committee, there's the action required. The meeting was to be had with, which has happened, with the University of Otago, discussing the MOU. I unfortunately couldn't make it that particular day, but I know CE, Sarah, Alexa, Kate and Marion all attended that meeting, and any of those councillors may want to make comment, but that essentially has been, the action has been undertaken. Alexa.
I'd like to thank the university and Lloyd and Somerville in particular for bringing together his team, and a huge amount of work went into their presentations, which were really illuminating and enlightening. And I'd also like us to consider, so I'd like to move a motion of thanks to them, but also to consider how we work more closely with the university to inform ourselves and to create an environment where we can use their knowledge somehow. I'm not exactly sure how we need to do this, but I see opportunity for a partnership where universities in other parts of this country and other parts in the world are at the same place where a regional council is. They usually have a partnership, and I'd like to see us figure out how to progress that. Waikato Regional Council and Waikato University are a good example of that.
So I just wondered, before we go to just coming back to you in a minute, Alexa, with regards to a motion, and you might want to just frame something up, but
I will.
Just Sarah, I just wondered whether you want to share any advice about the best way forward. Are we better to have a conversation at a CE council time to flesh this out a bit more, or what would you suggest?
I think the university, the occasion we had at the university was fantastic. It was really great to see some opportunities through the research that's been done at the university that we could potentially partner on, particularly thinking strategically and further into the future. What I would suggest is that probably the best thing for us to do at the moment is to have a smaller, more discreet conversation, perhaps with a couple of leaders from the university and ourselves, to talk jointly about the best way forward that might work for both this council and for the university. As staff, we do have an MOU in place, and that is particularly in regards to science, but of course there's so much more that the university offers that we could be collaborating on. So really, I think it's a matter of narrowing down in partnership with the university how we might like to take the relationship forward. So my suggestion would be a second follow-up meeting with specifically that view to narrowing down the areas where we could work together.
Thanks, Sarah. Alexa, you comfortable with that approach? And and what doesn't really need a motion other than someone, one or two of us, essentially following that up, as Sarah has suggested, with the appropriate people from the university to move things along and get probably a bit more flesh on the bones or whatever.
Yes, it may not need a motion, so but we do need to put it on the action list.
Okay.
That would be great. We don't need a motion to do that, I don't think. So I'll just move a motion of thanks to the university staff and to Chancellor Dr. Void and Somerville for convening that meeting.
Thank you. Would someone like to, Hilary, is that a seconder, Hilary? Thank you. Any discussion? Kate.
I think Marian's got her hand up as well.
Sorry.
I was lucky enough to attend that, and it was absolutely fantastic, and I'd like to concur with that. I think the other opportunity that we need to consider, and why I'm welcome to be part of that further discussion, is the opportunity with some of the catchment groups and some of the communities for lower level study that the university had. I know that I live in an area that's been particularly well studied by Professor Alan Mark, or Sir Alan Mark, and the students that came up, and we benefited greatly from that knowledge. I think there are opportunities that we need to look out that we can be the bridge to do, as well as what they can do with us ourselves.
Thank you. Marion.
Thank you. I've got 2 points to make. One, it was first point that's not counted. This was a fabulous meeting at the university. But I would like us to be kind of focused on the kinds of areas that we would like them to help in. And obviously what Kate just mentioned there with in biodiversity issues, but there's also soil issues, but there's also transport. And there's any number of other issues. There's port, you know, the importance of the port. We need to be quite careful. We just don't go with a sort of an open thing, but we specify and ask, have you got people who can contribute to that debate? That's a saving of money. Secondly, there is an example of this in our city, that's Dunedin, and that is the Orokonui Knowledge Group. And you might remember that, Councillor Noon, which was set up, I think, in 2015. And it has Orokonui is a research base, rather like the marine part of the university was before, is a research base for any number of different works. And that becomes quite handy because we learn from it, they learn from it. It's a quid pro quo, you know, we're both learning, we're both gaining from it. That's what I'd like to say. I'd very much like to be involved in this. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. So Alexa, you're happy that between you, Kate and Marion, that, you know, you identify the appropriate people at the university and push this along?
Yep, and I'd like to have some oversight with a staff member that may be able to help us narrow down the fields of interest.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like it put on the action register so we actually get it done.
Okay. So,
is that okay, Sarah?
I think it might be useful to actually move a motion in that regard, rather than have something on the
okay,
just so we capture it properly.
Okay.
So, group responsible. I'll write something in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you. And we can just we should deal with it now before we move on, to be fair.
I've thrown a motion in the chat. Create a group responsible convening a further meeting to include councillors Hobbs, Forbes, Wilson and a staff member. Purpose is to narrow focus of interest.
Everyone comfortable? We've got a seconder. I'll second that. Sorry. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. Just raise your hand. All those, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much, Alexa. Okay. Moving on to item 7, which is the quarterly activity report. Welcome to Jasmine and Nick. And this is essentially a paper for noting, which picks up the quarterly report, or the last quarterly report that relates to the last financial year, and then it incorporates it into a full year performance, and then it's obviously links to the next item as well, or whatever the next, the financial report, which covers off the preliminary end year result. So Jasmine and Nick, we're in your hands.
Yeah, okay. I'll just lead in and throw to Jasmine. She can just run you through some of the highlights of the report. But as you noted, this is the activity report, so it's the non-financials, and it's written from the point of view of this is forming the draft of what will be going into the statement of service provision in the annual report. Coming up after this, we've got the financial side of what will be going into the annual report. But this is the activity report, based around levels of service and the measures and targets, and flows on from what you've seen previously in the 3 quarterly reports for the year to date. But I'll throw to Jasmine and she can sort of just run you through the report and some of the highlights, and then any questions that you've got.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome, Jasmine. You seem to be on mute. Still can't hear.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, great. Thank you. Kia ora, thank you. As Nick has said, this Q4 report is slightly different from our usual format. It is based on the content that we would have in the Statement of Servants' Performance in the annual report. The draft annual report is a statutory document, and that is currently, we're starting the process of auditing that with the content for that is going to the auditors. As we go through, I'll just take you the performance highlights. Q4 has been busy. There's been some great achievements. The RPS was notified. We've secured funding for Maintain the Games, and the Climate Resilience Program is progressing well. In terms of overall performance, the majority of targets have been achieved. We have 16 that are partially achieved, 5 not achieved. I've also got a summary there of the financials, but as Nick said, or Councillor Noon, that the finance report following that, this report will go into more detail. The main differences, so that following this, there's 2 attachments. The first attachment is more in line with the draft annual report format. The second is what you're used to seeing, the general quarterly performance report, and that shows the progress of results by quarter. The main changes, or the key changes for Q4, are those that have changed to partially achieved, including biodiversity strategy and action plan, SOE, flood protection, drainage, river management, CDM, climate change program, and the Wakatipu ferry service. And in the attachment, it explains the rationale for why there's been that movement and how we've landed there. And changing to red was the regulatory percentage of performance monitoring returns processed. There's a number of factors that have impacted on the results. Those are listed there and detailed further in the report. I might just throw this over to Mike in case he has anything he wants to add.
Thanks, Jasmine. Mike?
Thanks, Jasmine.
Can't hear you very well, Mike. You might have to turn up your volume.
All right.
That's better.
Yep, so paragraph 13, which Jasmine's just run through, and it reflected the change from Q3 to Q4. One of the key drivers there for the green to yellow from Q3 to Q4 is the simply just not getting a report in front of council. So the work has often been done, but due to other demands, we just haven't quite got that report to you. And the reports are scheduled. That is coming to you after that 30 June date. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Back to you, Jasmine, or you're all done and dusted?
I think I just will draw your attention. I'm just trying to find the correct page, scrolling through to page, it is page 70 of the agenda. That's where the result summary starts, showing the quarterly tracking. And I think I will just open it to councillors if there's comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Questions, comments, Kate, and then Marion.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions. One is on paragraph 14 on page 19, and it's the 3rd bullet point. A review of the Tairi scheme was not completed due to the scope and scale of the project being reassessed, and I appreciate that. We've just signed off on the minutes of the long-term plan, which were giving that Councillor Calvert got a resolution about us communicating with the community on those sort of things. And I'm just wondering at what stage the community will be have input into the scope and scale of the project being reassessed.
So that might be a question for Gavin if he's with us.
Okay, Mr. Chair, the scope of those of that scheme review is something that is still being developed. The reason why it could not be completed within the time frame is the scale of the project was basically larger than was originally envisaged in terms of incorporating things like climate change and other things. And once we've got that scope nailed down, we will then share that with stakeholders in the community. I don't have time
Okay.
on that.
Thank you. I'm presuming that's consultation, yeah. The other one is page 23 of 109. Nick, I think the report is really, really good, and Jasmine and Mike, I really appreciated it. There's one sentence here, and unfortunately it's the very first sentence in the grey blocks, that I went back and looked at the annual plan and I couldn't see where it came from. And I have asked you questions, and thank you for your comments yesterday. Looking after Otago's water is our top priority and our biggest challenge. I can't accept the last part of that sentence. Yes, it's a challenge, but climate change, and especially in light of the recent IPCC, I think is our biggest challenge as a region, as individuals. And I'm not quite sure where that's been picked up from. And I just wanted some clarity, because if this is going to be part of our annual report, I can't support that part.
Any response, Nick?
Well, yeah, this is what you've got there on page 23 in the grey box is an overview of the activity. So we've got that for all of the activities, because this is going into the annual report. So it's explaining to the wider public what that activity is about. But as we said, this is a draft, and obviously this we can refine the wording if councillors have got comments on it. This, based on where we're at, this is the narrative that we've put together. Mike might have a comment on it, but yeah, if councillors have a view that that's that's not how we should word it, we could change it. We could say, rather than our biggest challenge, we could say that it's a significant challenge. Would you be happy with that, Mike?
Well, I'm going to stick my head out a bit here and say that since I've been working for ORC, it's been made quite clear to me that water is our #1 priority. And I heard councillors say that at the December LTP workshop as well, reconfirming that. So that's just where I'm at, and I thought where staff are at. So, and I hear you, Kate, that could be shifting, but I'm just operating on what I know and the signals that I've clearly had from leadership. So I think I'm saying that sentence is actually correct.
Yeah, I suppose the point is a lot of our work programs are focused on that particular issue, whether it's regulatory, whether it's non-regulatory, whether it's well, those two areas alone, there's a huge, I suppose, work program going forward. Yeah, like I'm reasonably relaxed about the current wording. Obviously, the challenge will be there for a long time. It's not as if okay, we're making steps in the right direction, but the journey is only really begun. But I don't know. Others may have a comment. Marion, on this topic, is it Marion? Hey. Can you hear me, Marion?
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. This is not on this topic. It's on another question. So if you want to tidy up this topic, please do.
Okay. Kate, are you after hearing Mike's response, what are your thoughts?
I wasn't challenging it being our top priority. I totally appreciate that's what both financially and our work time is. I am challenging the words, our biggest challenge. And because I think we need to start looking at our biggest challenge. And I've been quite clear about that, especially since the IPCC latest report came out. I'm not trying to deflect anything. I just want us to be very aware there are much bigger, and I think much bigger challenges ahead.
Yeah, and I suppose the only thing I would say to that was that, yeah, reflecting on, when we had the prioritising session, where was it? I think it was in Cromwell, leading into the draft annual plan LTP process. I'm not sure where climate change sat, but it wasn't in the first 2 or 3. I think it was water, biodiversity, biosecurity, transport, climate change. I just can't remember where climate change fitted in, whether it was number 2 or 3 or 4, in fact, but it certainly wasn't number 1.
And no, it's not about the priority. I totally get that. It's about what is our biggest challenge. And what you're talking about is the priorities.
Sorry, I don't want to prolong this, but no, just when I read it, it's what it says. But anyway, was there any other comment, Gretchen?
It's a paper on our operational performance. So I read it that it was reflecting that it's an operational challenge to us to meet that challenge that's presented there. So yeah, I agree with what Kate's saying, that climate change is probably a giant challenge, but we're talking about operationally for our organisation and meeting that priority in this respect is how I took it. For example, right there in the first one, we're now taking a regional precautionary approach to our hydrology modelling, and we've got a really tight time frame, so we've had to really pare back what we're going to do in future FMUs, because it's such a big operational challenge now to actually fit that into our program. So that's how I took it. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, Alexa, on this topic?
Yes, on this topic, I just think that the easy solution to this, because it's a big challenge and a big problem, but looking after Otago's water is our top priority. Full stop. We don't have to acknowledge what our biggest challenge is. I am with Kate that our biggest challenge is climate change, but it may not be our top priority. So are we willing to say that water is our top priority over climate change, even though climate change is our biggest challenge?
Seems like a good compromise.
Yeah, look, we'll remove our biggest challenge. It's no biggie. We'll,
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll sort that.
Thank you, Marion.
Thank you. It's a financial question, and it's back to paragraph 10. And I want to just understand something. We said there that we had a 5.5 variance made up of spending of 10 million and receiving 5 million more revenue than budget. Was that the same variance that you advised us was likely to happen as we were working on the long-term plan? That's to you, Nick. Or is it something like that? Remember when we were writing the long-term plan, we said we're going to have to pay for the overrun that we're going to have in this financial year, 2021. Does that look like that?
Yeah, we always had a variance, a big deficit budgeted in this financial year, because if you remember, we had an increase in costs that we weren't funding, and we were going to deal with that in the LTP, and then we also added $1 million to that in COVID. We indicated then, coming through the LTP, that part of the increased spend in year 1 of the LTP was already being put in place this year with, we had unbudgeted increases in a number of areas, as we were ramping up earlier than year 1 into a lot of the freshwater responses. But to be fair, the final number that's come out is probably even slightly bigger than what we had been indicating in the as we were going through the LTP, largely because there's been some of that spend includes some stuff that we didn't have. It only got decided late, so we didn't have it included in the early LTP forecast for this year, which was one of it was the additional spend for this year in the bus driver living wage, and the other one is although we'd factored in that we were going to have all the environment court costs and such, those costs, the final costs that have ended up were bigger than what we had been anticipating as we were building the LTP and indicating that we were going to have an overspend, an even bigger deficit than we'd budgeted this year. So yes, it was, but it has actually turned out slightly bigger than what we were even envisaging then.
Thank you, Nick.
Any further questions regarding the quarterly activity report and performance overview? Carmen.
Thank you. Mine is more, if you can look on page 6 and it's 26 below, you have these 6 icons called community outcomes. You see that? You've got communities that connect, environment, supports healthy people. There's a world map, sustainable way of life, Te Ara Māori, and then you've got a bus. Can everybody see that? Because that's what I'm going to ask the question about, just so you understand. You with me so far?
Yep.
There's the icons, the community outcomes icons. So we're looking at page 6 and then it's 26. Can you even see that?
Yes.
Okay, so if you go and we're talking about Lake Hayes, culvert water augmentation, if we go up, you have got something there that says to me, if you come down a little bit, you talk about the flooding hazard at Lake Hayes as well. And my point here is we talk about that. So actually, and you're going up to page 4 now of 24. So I'm just showing you this, the icons, the 6. Now on page 4 of 24, the measure talks about develop a program of work for managing the water quality and flood hazard of Lake Hayes. So you've got the flood hazard. But if you come back to the icon on page 6 of 26, the world map that's of those community outcomes is all about natural hazards and the flooding. How come that does not get to be highlighted and brought to the fore? Because that to me is something to do with natural hazards, flooding, emergency management, which is what that does. So can someone explain to me why that one's been missing, please? That little icon of the world, when I thought flooding of Lake Hayes would be part of. Does anyone follow me or not? Or have I confused everybody?
Councillor. Through the chair, I can make a comment on that. The community outcomes as they're represented in this are, I guess, focused on the core impacts that this activity the significant activity as a whole has in terms of outcomes for the community. And I have worked on those with managers who've kind of helped to identify where the main focus of the work and the main outcomes are. The point that you've raised, I think, has probably been an oversight on our part. However, in the final document, these icons that are shown here are the community outcomes that were included in the LTP. For the annual report that will go out to public, we will actually be referencing the community outcomes that were set in 2018, because that is the set of outcomes that were kind of referenced in the annual plan that was set for 2021. And but I think that's probably been an oversight in terms of that Lake Hayes impact and climate change and hazards. I'm not sure if Mike wants to add something further there.
Oh, I think you summed it up well there, Jason. Look, I think there's just a judgment call there, and look, Gavin might jump in, but I suspect that a staff view here has been that Lake Hayes hasn't been about managing a hazard other than water quality and the hazards that can create to life. But that's not the classical hazards as in, we've defined under our activity. So I just think there's been a judgment call there that, Lake Hayes in this example is more about the environment and, and the mediation work that's going on there that happens to be, well, you all know it. I'm not going to go on about it. So yeah, just a judgment call.
Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment. Am I allowed to do that, Andrew?
Yep, absolutely. This is speaking to the motion or just comment, general comment?
General comment and supporting the motion and supporting the motion.
How about
just simply to say, look.
Sorry. How about I get someone to move and second it, so it gives you the motion, so that it gives you the flexibility just to cover off whatever you want to say.
I'm happy to move the motion that notes the activity report.
Thank you. Have I a seconder? Seconded by Hillary. Any discussion? If not, raise your hand. Support.
Can I speak to the
motion? Please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Sorry, Brian, all yours.
I was simply going to say that obviously it's been a very busy delivery time. RPS, LTP, land and water plan, all going on. And but at the same time as that delivery, it's also been a very challenging building time. And there's some reference in the report to recruitment, scientists, this type of thing. So I'd just like to commend Sarah and her team for the work that's going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Any further speakers to the motion, or are there any other queries before we go back to speaking to the motion? Everyone's comfortable. I've actually moved and put the motion anyway, haven't I? Sorry, slightly ahead of myself. Oh, I obviously haven't drunk enough coffee. Okay, everyone's comfortable with that that report that has been noted. No further discussion. Motion's been put. Moving on to item 7.2, the financial report, 30 June 2021, preliminary year-end result. Once again, we're in Nick's hands and Sarah as well, finance manager. Welcome, Sarah.
Yeah, I can probably lead in. This is our usual finance report that you receive. So has four key parts to it. So first off, you've got the revenue and expenses. You've got then the balance sheet, and there's the treasury summary, and then there's the activity report. As we just discussed, the key thing to note is that there is the deficit is bigger than what we budgeted, and that was forecast that was going to be that was going to be the case, but it is slightly bigger than what we had been forecasting. The key reasons are outlined there, and I'm sure most councillors remember and are well aware of those reasons. It's we've had additional spend particularly in the policy and planning area, and in regulatory, where we've we'd increased our resourcing there as well. So and then the third area is in transport, where there was the living wage was added. There was some other additional costs that were fairly minor, but we've also had in the mix in the transport space has been the impact of COVID, and then $2 fares on bus revenue as well. So there has been quite a lot going on, and there's quite a lot in the report. These numbers are they are provisional at this point. It does have all the operational expenditure, like our internal operational expenditure, and obviously our cash spend in there, but there is still things to be finalised and come through for the final financial result that'll be in the annual report, and the the biggest thing there is valuations. We've still got to complete the valuation of the port and valuation of investment property. So those adjustments will be factored into the final result when this goes to audit and then council in October.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nick. Sarah, you're comfortable?
Yes, no, I'm comfortable with Nick's summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Any queries, questions for Sarah and Nick? Michael, D.
Yep. Thanks, Andrew. I know this is a report on previous expense, but I wanted to ask Nick a question about the bleeding wound that is the $2 bus fare. And it is still costing us a great deal of money. Does he have any intelligence, any information about how long this is likely to go on for in terms of government assistance, as there was last year through Waka Kotahi during a COVID lockdown? Or do we have to carry on carrying this monthly burden of big losses indefinitely as long as the lockdown goes on?
I think there's probably that question sort of got two parts, and potentially Gary is better placed to answer it, because right now we're in lockdown, and obviously that impacts fare revenue. But prior to lockdown, we were, and through most of last financial year, we had the $2 fares in place, which meant that even when the bus patronage had come back up to pre-COVID levels, we were still collecting less fare revenue than we had budgeted, because $2 fares don't recoup as much as what the previous fare structure did. So that is at our cost as council, because that's our decision. Now, prior to that, when we were in lockdown at the start of the 2021 financial year, Waka Kotahi was fully subsidising the lost revenue from COVID. But once it switched into the patronage had returned, then the decrease in revenue as a result of $2 fares is at our council cost. So there's work to be done if we wanted Waka Kotahi to be involved in subsidising a council decision to collect less fare revenue. But where it's at currently, and right now with the current lockdown and obviously fare revenue having been reduced, I'd have to throw to Gary or Gavin to answer what Waka Kotahi's position is on that. Although we are, unlike the previous lockdown, we are still able to collect fare revenue because we can do it cashless and contactless using the B card, which we couldn't do in the lockdowns last year.
Comfortable, Michael? Not financially.
Comfortable's the wrong word, but I say thanks to Nick for that. I wonder whether Gary or Gavin does have any thoughts or clues about where the agency's sitting right now as this lockdown goes on. Do we just carry on carrying the burden ourselves?
Gavin or Gary?
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to Mr. Maloney, but I wonder if this discussion might better be part of the next paper around the $2 fare and the go forward piece on that.
I was anticipating that, Gavin. Yes, thank you.
Okay, we'll park that thought. Brian, and then Hilary.
Yeah, thank you. It's a question on page 75 of the 109, where it talks about the 1.6 million reduction in compliance revenue from budget. So Nick, you've highlighted the extra expenditure in terms of compliance and staff. Are you able to remind me just about the 1.6?
Yeah, there's actually two parts to the consents and compliance. You've got the consents, the actual consenting area, and then you've got the compliance or the performance monitoring area. The 1.6 deficit is in the performance monitoring area. So the additional spend, that area, if you look at the activity report, which is on page 83, and you'll look, it does have two separate lines there, and you'll be able to see there that the additional spend was in the consenting area. Now, and their other income was actually on budget. Ideally, that would have been over budget to recoup some of the overspend in the consent cost, but it wasn't. But the 1.6 in other income that is down is in the performance monitoring area, and their cost was actually pretty much on budget. I think it was slightly under budget. But the revenue was down on budget largely because we had some wrong assumptions in how much revenue we would recover via fees, where the costs that we'd put in there included quite a lot of additional administration costs, and it included costs for doing work on processing a backlog of previous year's performance monitoring returns. Now, when we did the budget, we used according to the revenue and financing policy, we assumed that 75% of all that cost would be recovered via performance fees. But if it's administrative or it relates to previous year's returns, we're not going to be able to recover it via fees. So there was a portion in there that our assumption was wrong, and we've fixed that in year one of the LTP, where we've better defined where that work sits, and then only looking to recover the performance monitoring fees on the performance monitoring work at that 75% rate. So the upshot is, the simple answer is that basically our revenue assumption was incorrect in the annual plan.
Thank you.
Hilary.
I'd like to move, I haven't got a question, but I'd like to move this motion so it can be then hopefully seconded, and then we can talk to it if we feel in the need.
We've got a seconder, seconded by Carmen. Any speakers? Hilary?
These are, of course, the way of them is that they are historic documents, that they're a description of what happened. So in that sense, there's no point railing against them or anything, but we can change what we do in the future. And I think it would be worth looking when we're doing budgeting to see if we can more accurately in some way put into the budget some of the things that weren't in the budget this time round. And I know Kevin has started talking to Nick about this, but when you have such huge eye-watering sums that, especially in the likes of planning and things, I just feel we ought to be able to predict and be able to put in the budget some likelihood of what we're doing. This isn't sort of a petty cash thing for coffee and biscuits. This is millions and millions of dollars that we are spending outside the budget, which maybe we could get a more accurate handle on for the future. So that's not a comment on so much on what's happened in the past, but that's what's happened up till now has highlighted that. I know it's not an easy task, but we need to be able to do, I think, a wee bit better than that huge amount of outside the budget expenditure. And that includes things when we make decisions, but we don't budget for the possibility of even making those decisions or whatever we're doing.
Okay, and thank you. So it sounds like Kevin and yourself is following that up with Nick
Yes.
to try and get that.
I know it's not easy, but there's got to be some way to do something better.
Let's go. Any other speakers to the motion? Kevin.
Yeah, technology. Sorry about it. You got me? Can you hear
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Look, just reinforcing what Councillor Calvert was saying, doing very good work with Mr. Donnelly at the moment, but it is a very difficult balance on being able to budget something that then has a rating implication, and then if we don't use that money, so we've got to weigh up that balance. So yeah, there may be a way around it, but in reality, it's the local government rules, and we've got to look at that as well. So we'll continue to work. It's just, yeah, big numbers. We need to have some way of knowing that that's possibly going to happen, to inform us and to inform the community. So, but we'll keep working through that. And just on the full report, look, it's very. I think anyone can just about pick it up and read through it and understand what's happening. So congratulations to the staff for the way they put that together. If you could pass it on, Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Kevin. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Against? Carried. Thank you all. Moving on to 7.3. This is the annual plan 22-23 process and timetable. It seems to have come around particularly quickly. Mike is the author of this paper, and I see you've got some attachments, or an attachment with 4 or 5 slides to talk us through as well, Mike. So welcome back, Mike, and we're in your hands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'll just direct you straight to the attachment, which is 3 presentation slides. They are pages 89 to 91 in your agenda. Look, the purpose of the cover report and these slides is really just to signal that, yes, the AP process has started, and to give you some oversight on what that process looks like. And of course, an opportunity to discuss and ask questions, if you feel the need. And yes, I pick up your comments there, Mr. Chair. It can feel like Groundhog Day, particularly with an experienced set of governors that we have. You've been through a few of these, but as you're probably aware, every AP and indeed LTP has some sort of unique aspect to it. And I'm just thinking back the other day to our COVID outbreak experience right in the middle of the 2021 annual plan. So that was indeed something different that we had to deal with as staff and as governors. So there's 3 slides, the what and the why, which is really just that recap for you. The approach and timing, and those 2 slides, approach and timing, are linked. So moving into page 89, the what and the why, it gives you, it just outlines the process, what it delivers and what it isn't. In terms of the process, just as a recap, we have an adopted LTP with a 3-year work program and associated funding approach. And obviously it looks out, and that's in detail, and it looks out in less detail from years 4 to 10. The AP process enables us to review that detail, and it also allows us to adjust to significant changes regarding our services, our role, and indeed our financial strategy and policy and infrastructure strategy. And just the only caveat around making significant changes to our LTP is that the council needs to be appropriately informed before it can make significant decisions, and the Local Government Act is very clear about that and outlines what that looks like. And then of course the process, it enables us to connect with our community on particularly those significant proposals, if there are any. And then the slide goes on and just outlines what the deliverables are, and I'm sure you're clear on those. I guess there's three perspectives around on delivery, and they are that it's giving you advice and information as for decision making, and it's equally providing information for ratepayers and customers to connect, and obviously the organisation, it's the process that's giving us the organisation a way to consider and formalise changes to the existing work program in our LTP. That bottom point there, the process is not about recasting, reconsulting the LTP, and that's important. And I would suggest that if you have any council around the country that is finding itself in the position that it has to actually recast and reconsult the entire LTP work program, it's a signal that they've got something wrong, or to be fair, there's been some major change in our operating environment. And if that was the case, I think a lot of councils would be affected by that sort of issue. So jumping into page 90, the next slide, approach, just breaking it down, to 4 steps. And again, this will feel a bit like, what you've just gone through with the LTP, albeit it's review focused. There's 4 steps here. Initiate, that's where we're at the moment. And your ELT have already had their initial meeting, taking a sort of a first initial high-level flyover of our work program and our priorities. The identify step, the build, which is really review, and finalise. So the identify is really a strategic step. It's taking an overview of, as I say, what might have changed in our operating environment. Are there indeed any significant changes or amendments that we might need to consider for this annual plan, or indeed the next annual plan, or LTP for that matter. The build phase, once it's we have a bit of a steer on that, on what's happening strategically, staff get into refining the year 2 budgets and indeed the years beyond. As part of that, we're engaging with councillors, with council, bringing the detailed expenditure and funding impacts of refinements or indeed proposals. You recall we refined measures and targets in the LTP. We'd like to bring that conversation into the annual plan process as well. And also importantly, we're becoming a lot stronger as an organisation in reaching out to our stakeholders and building those relationships. So that would be happening in this step as well. And then the 4th step, finalising, that's really looking to what you do with your proposal, your annual plan proposal, in terms of how you may decide to engage with the community on it. And I'm just signalling that very broadly, there's 2 approaches. One is that if you do have a significant change, then you will go out and consult on it as under the Local Government Act. And the other approach is that option you have is that if there's no significant change to your LTP, you can just communicate your intentions to the community, which really isn't such a formal process. And you may recall we have done that in the past. So that's the approach slide. And putting some timelines around that is the following slide, page 91. And that really just steps out, shows you those steps against time frame. Initiate August, obviously happening now. The identify phase, September, October. I think there's a council workshop booked for 14 October, so that will be a date that will be staff will be targeting to bring information and have discussion with you, and then moving into that build phase, which is really October, December, and looking to bring a pre-draft annual plan proposal to you for more detailed consideration. And then importantly, at that phase, you're starting to get an idea of what kind of engagement is appropriate for the proposal that you're looking at. And then that spills over into the approach that we take for finalising in February, May. And again, I'm just outlining those two approaches there that very broadly you have that you will have. So that's it in a nutshell. So I'll just open it up for questions or discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, just a question from me on the basis this is quite different to last year, simply because we're not dealing with an LTP. However, you still have potential amendments and potential SCPs, special consultative processes, who knows. But in theory, it should be a much leaner process. But my question is, just with regards to the two approaches you mentioned on that second last slide. So if we were to take approach number 2, once we know what's happening or not happening, the non-formal consultation, would that still require a resolution from council to essentially head down that path?
Correct. Yes, it would. It's quite a considered. There would be a report, a formal report that would come to committee and ultimately approved by council, as we've done in the past with a communications component to that. Yeah, it's an important decision.
Yeah, and obviously what dovetails into that is the stakeholder engagement. If you were to go down the no formal consultation, the stakeholder engagement may look at a more comprehensive approach, perhaps.
Correct. I think that this council is putting itself into a much stronger position in terms of the way it can engage in a more sophisticated way with the community. And it's quite heartening, actually. I've seen that happen over the short time I've been here, where that in that build phase, as you get a deeper level of stakeholder engagement, it actually takes the heat off the finalisation stage, because you've had the conversations up front that matter. You're not surprising anybody, or you know where the conflict sits, and you've had opportunities to work through them. So, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kate. And then Michael.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is on, I'm just intrigued with the questions that Andrew just posed about possibly not or consulting on any plan. We've just signed off on on the minutes of the last long-term plan, which suggested that we'd be doing some work on a region-wide methodology for water improvement funding. That was in answer to the Lake Hayes situation. Would that be the sort of thing, if we decided to do that, you'd be saying that we would have to consult on specially?
Sorry, the councillor broke up there. I couldn't hear.
Okay.
What was being said.
Yeah, I can answer that. That was there for us to look at that over this next few months period leading into Christmas. So yes, it does allow for that. That once we've been through that and we've looked at some options, we'd look to workshop that with council over the next few months, and then we can determine where we need to go with that. But yeah, yes, it is. It's that sort of thing that we have to look at what the significance is and what we're talking about, and what might come out of the analysis we do, and then we have to make the decision whether it is something that kicks in that we have to take through the annual plan, or whether it's whatever comes out of it might be the next annual plan or the next LTP. Until we've done the work and we've had a discussion around it, we don't know where that'll sit. But they are the sort of things that potentially could lead to the determination on what the approach will be with whether or not we have to consult or not.
Great. And my second question relates, and we've just looked at the variances in the river management. I mean, they were on the previous report. One of the things that we talked about during the long-term plan, and I'm sorry, I can't remember where we left it, if we left it in any place at all, was having forward work programs being able to be seen with more clarity. And I'm just wondering, is that something that we're working on in the annual plan and that sort of stuff that you're talking about, Mike, that there'll be, except of course, because we get floods and things that change that work program, but we'll be able to see the priority projects in actual, the river management groups, areas?
The question of are we developing more clarity around our detailed budgets, and the short answer to that is yes, that's a business improvement goal that we have and we're working to, and the improvement is occurring behind the scenes. So that happens in step 3. So and that's right across the business. So yes, that would encompass flood and drainage activity.
And our constituents or the ratepayers will be able to see those work programs in the annual plan potentially?
Well, we've done that in the past, so yes.
Great.
Well, just to be clear, was the question about flood and drainage or about river management? You asked about river management, didn't you?
I did ask about river management. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's more detail in the LTP and an annual plan on flood and drainage than there is necessarily around river management, which I think was where that original question came up. But I would have thought it's one of those things that it's probably more a question for the implementation committee to dive into that into more detail on what more detail is around the plan that's in there. What we're trying to do is make sure that there's a level of allocation of resources into that area, and quite often, because you've got to remember, you're setting annual plans and LTPs. Like the annual plan now, we're talking about the one that will start from 1 July next year. So there is an element of that work plan for that year from there will be evolving and develop as that year goes on. But what we want to know right now, from an annual plan point of view, do we have enough resource allocated into each area and we fund it appropriately? And then it's really probably for other meetings and other committees to make sure that they're comfortable with the level of detail below that, and that actually occurs at that level of detail.
Thank you.
Michael D.
Thanks, Andrew. Mike, thanks for that very clear walkthrough reminder of how the annual plan process works. But in the middle of that, you had in bold type a bit of a warning to us about recasting LTP and being a bit radical in terms of change. And I want to respectfully disagree with you about that. We have to be now more than ever, I think, others might disagree, a adaptive and nimble council, given the amount of change we see around us, given the amount of uncertainty in the environment that we and our ratepayers are in. And I can quote to you such things as government intrusion into our affairs, directing that we do certain things or stop doing certain things, the impact of climate change and unlikely government decisions on that coming up pretty soon, the impact of lockdown and how God knows from July the 1st on next year, how that will impact us. I think we have to be more adaptable in shorter timeframes than you were suggesting, that once you've got an LTP, you stick with it unless thick and thin hits. The questions I asked about public transport before is a good example of that and the financial impact it's having on our accounts. So I wonder whether you might modify that view slightly, Mike, about recasting LTP. I've always believed, especially when I was in managerial positions myself, that you plan your work and then you work your plan. If you've got a plan, it is not encased in marble. It's able to be changed when circumstances change. Surely that's true.
Through the chair, yes, I totally, absolutely agree, and that's what the annual plan is about. It enables you to refine your 10-year plan, and it enables you to make significant changes where there has been where there is a need or a requirement to do that. And the issue of climate change could be an example where an issue of such magnitude that you would need to make a major change to your 10-year plan. So look, I agree with you. I think it might be just semantics here.
Thanks, Mike. That's comforting. That's good.
Thank you. Any other queries with regards to this annual plan 22-23 process report? Someone happy to move? Moved by Kate, seconded by Marion. Any further discussion, Kevin?
No, mine was just a silent second, that's all.
Oh, excellent. No further discussion. I'll put the motion. All those raise their hand. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Nick, Mike. Well done. Moving on to the next item, 7.4. This is the outcome of the interim $2 Dunedin fare. The report provided to seek decisions on bus fares that will apply to Dunedin following the end of phase 2, the transitional fare period put in place to enable deployment of the electronic ticketing system and test. We've got Gavin and Gary available to answer questions. Was there anything that you wanted to comment on, Gavin or Gary, as an introduction to your report?
Mr. Maloney will just introduce part of the paper, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Gary?
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, you've touched on it this morning. COVID has changed the world and public transport's not been unaffected by that. And so that's probably had an impact on what we've seen in the last few months. When we looked at doing the $2 fare in Dunedin, there were a couple of reasons that we looked at doing that. One was to make it easier to bring in the B card, and in that respect, it was really successful. The second thing was to understand the patronage and revenue implications of implementing that fare. And as I said, COVID has impacted that. What we've seen in terms of that patronage, and I've actually extended the period. The paper just talks about a comparison between September and February. I've now picked up through to the end of June by using the 1920 patronage rather than the previous financial year. And when I do that, our patronage result is about just under a 2% decrease over the network. For our longer routes, and for example, that's our Palmerston, Mosgiel, Port Chalmers, and Portobello routes, we kind of got mixed results. The Palmerston and Mosgiel services, we saw an increase. The others, we actually saw a decrease, and that was a bit interesting. While we've seen, the patronage do better than it has done for a lot of regions, as I point out in the paper, there's not any evidence that it's delivered any specific outcome, such as, it's resulted in carbon reduction, it's delivered good social cohesion kind of outcomes. It has helped us retain that patronage. And with respect to those outcomes, that's kind of talked about on page 101 of the report. I guess in terms of cost, did help us establish what was going on there. And you'll see in the report that on average, we've lost about not quite 100k per month in terms of that reduced fare. While we had higher patronage in Mosgiel, for example, we also would have lost the most fare revenue on that route because we went from a smart card fare of $4.40 down to over half of that at $2. What we're seeking today is a decision around what happens next. And until we have that decision, the status quo, so the current fares will remain. That will have an impact on a targeted rate reserve because it will carry that for the moment. And as the paper points out, our targeted rate reserve for Dunedin public transport is in deficit by about $6.5 million. Our long-term plan projections look to rebuild that reserve, particularly over the next 5 years, and that was to increase the targeted rate by 20% each year to make that happen. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Gary. Just a question from me at the front end, the fluctuation in patronage where you've got a mixed bag, where the patronage tapered off, were there any changes to the timetables or anything else that could have perhaps influenced that tapering off?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. No, so we've been running up until the current COVID lockdown. We've been running the same level of service from September through to, what are we now, July basically. So that hasn't changed at all. I mean, normally through a year you see fluctuations in patronage irrespective. And so what we've done is I think we've compared apples with apples by looking at previous months, 12 months ago, and a bit longer for some of those other months.
Okay, thank you. And I know Alexa and Kate had been working on some alternative or additional motions, and I'll go to Alexa and then Kate at some point, but I'll just take the questions first, if that's okay. Hilary, then Brian, then Marion.
The Super Gold Card, I see in here something that says that Super Gold Card, your patronage has reduced by 8%, is it? Super Gold Card patronage showed a decrease of 8%. I'm interested to know whether that was during the time of day when they have it for free, or whether that was while they were paying for their rides.
I don't have that answer at hand. I can come back to you with that detail.
Well, the importance of it is that if we've reduced Super Gold Card users' patronage by 8%, and it's mostly during the time we're giving it away, even when we're giving it away for nothing, we can't get old people like me to use the bus. It matters whether the patronage is reduced, to me. So it would be useful if we could know that, because we do know that. I mean, we've got all the information that would give us that now, I would have thought.
If I can, I will certainly seek that out and provide that. But we know from the last COVID lockdown that even when we went into level 1, some of our seniors were not travelling as often, irrespective of whether it was free or not, just because of the impact of COVID.
But these patronage ones aren't during COVID, are they?
But I'm sorry, Councillor, what I'm saying is there's an impact of COVID that flows through this, and people's travel behaviours has changed. More people are working at home, for example, but we also saw that impacted our seniors, and that was a common kind of theme around the country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brian.
Thank you. I've got a question in relation to paragraph number 7, page 93. It says that council shaping future Dunedin transport business case will provide direction relating to fares. In the second sentence, it says that work will also be done in parallel to work by Dunedin City Council on fares and bus priority. So if you could provide some background to that, Gary, or somebody, just in terms of the DCC role in all this.
There's an error in that sentence. So we're all part of the Connecting Dunedin partnership, and the key thing that we reported back to you was around the Shaping Future Dunedin program. Out of that, we've got a range of things that we're looking at, including frequency and fares, infrastructure such as the super stops. Dunedin City will be doing work on parking, on park and ride, and on bus priority in Princes Street. And so the sentence should have talked about that work. So there is a error. It shouldn't have talked about fares at all. As I've fleshed out on the paper, to get that mode shift that the Shaping Future Dunedin program is seeking will require that integrated approach. It's just not about us putting extra bus services or cheaper fares, and it's also around Dunedin doing its bus priority, its park and ride, and the other things that fall on it.
Okay, so is it fair to assume that this council, the ORC, is the one doing the work on the fares and will ultimately make the decision?
That's correct, Councillor.
Thank you.
Marion.
Thank you. This is a weeny bit strange, but I just had an email today from a driver, and it made me query our statistics on which we base things. And this is what the driver wrote, and it is since lockdown. Since lockdown, significant number of urban bus users opting to say they can't internet top up B card, so not tagging on. They are not scanning on either, so their use of buses is untraceable. Now remember, they're getting on at the back. That's my comment, not hers. It is leading some users to assume it's free, so a driver like me that encourages tag on for safety reason gets pushback. That whole wee story made me really nervous about how reliable our usage figures are, particularly in a time like this.
If I can respond, Councillor. So we've been quite clear with our community that the services are not free. We've been quite clear with our messaging that cash is not preferred, that they have the online top-up. We've been clear with our messaging with the bus companies around how the interactions are to happen. We've also been clear around the undesirability of leaving passengers behind. Our bus patronage is running less than, more than 90% less than what it was prior to this lockdown. It's consistent with the last lockdown where we had manual counts. For this last 7 days, we've carried about 4,700 passengers. There may be some that have got on for free, but it's not the majority. We're getting that data through B card. We've been working with the operators to make sure that it works for them and for our passengers.
Okay, I really, this does cause for me some problem. I know it's probably a minor part of the figures, but I don't think the figures, are totally kosher.
So the figures in the report are, I've used post the last lockdown through to prior to this. The obligation, the contractual obligation is people should be collecting fares. They will be boarding through the front door. It's only in this lockdown, like the last one, where we have passengers boarding through the rear door. So I've got a lot of faith in the figures in the report. And we've said to operators, if it does happen that somebody gets to ride for free, that gets counted through a manual count button.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael D.
Thanks, Andrew. And thank you, Gary, for this paper as well. And Gavin, the thing I liked about the paper, amongst many things, was that you reminded us, Gary, that fares are not the be-all and end-all of patronage. I think every one of us councillors rejoices when our patronage rates goes up, because that's our measure of whether the PT system is working in Dunedin and Queenstown. At the moment, we can't tell that because of COVID. And going back to your comment about fares not being the necessarily main trigger of whether people use a bus or not, I'm aware that you have on earlier occasions reminded us that frequency is at least as important. Frequency and reliability of the service can mean more to people than the cost of the service. And I think I agree with that as well. I wonder whether you can give us a comment then from your own experience and from other regional councils around New Zealand of where higher frequencies, say in our case going to 15-minute frequencies on our city routes, has had an impact that could be measured. Are you aware of where any council has increased the frequency and been able to measure higher uptake of the service and therefore more fare revenue?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. It depends on the level of frequency that you're starting with. And so, for example, Tauranga introduced buses back into its city in 2001 and went from a lot of services that was 60 minutes. They started with that. Over time, we went to 30 minutes, and a lot of services we saw patronage growth in excess of what the demand elasticities would tell you. So we saw between 40 and 80% patronage growth on some services. We've got a lot of services that are at 30 minutes. You wouldn't expect to see that if you went down to 15 minutes. The kind of rule of thumb is for every kind of 10% increase in the level of service, you might get a 4% patronage growth. The challenge is, though, normally speaking, it will cost you it will cost you more to put that level of service in. You won't recoup a significant chunk of that through the extra fare box.
Yeah, that's a bit depressing, isn't it? Okay, thanks, Gary.
Alexa.
Sorry. Okay. Few things here. Thank you for the paper, firstly, Gary. It does outline some unpalatable truths we need to discuss and address as we go on. You've long told us, and I'm sure most of us are aware now, and Michael's just pointed this out, that it takes much more than a cheap or free bus ride to get people to change behaviour towards mode shift. But we do know that's part of the equation, and we also know that there's other parts of the equation that we need to understand and to be able to implement. And implementation of any other parts of the equation, and even identification of them, requires us to work with our partners, which are DCC and Waka Kotahi. So we really have to be doing that. And I know that you refer to discussions with DCC, but I don't feel that I have any transparency over those discussions. I've got no idea, apart from our meeting that Andrew, you were at, and Gavin, you were at, and Sarah with DCC, indicating that they're unhappy. Apart from that, I haven't got any other transparency over it, and I've had anecdotal discussions with councillors and people there, and they are unhappy with the discussions and the input that they've had into our public transport. So I want to see us. I don't feel that I have enough information to make the decisions that you want us to make today, because I don't have visibility over how our partners feel about it and what they want. And I realise that this is our decision, but I'm not prepared to make that decision without that information. And I think that we need to have some wide-ranging discussions with them, some very frank discussions. We have to include not just our research, but also research that's publicly available from organisations like the Transport Research Network, which is based at our university just down the road, and also the experiences of other councils. I see we've got information from Bay of Plenty Council here too, and that's great, but I want to see more, possibly even including Timaru and its on-demand trial, see how that's going. So basically, my position is I don't believe that we can determine the outcomes expected of fares, which is what you're asking us to do, without partner input. So that means I can't actually support either of the motions, either of the options you have there. So Kate and I have worked together to come up with a possible alternative motion. We've worked together as chair and deputy chair of the Transport Committee to try and do that, and have taken into account our transport plans in thinking about this. And so that's kind of where I stand, and I would like us to discuss that further, but want to know where everybody else is.
Maybe if I go to Kate, and then maybe if we could have your suggested 2 motions by the sound of it circulated in some way, shape or form, we can have that. Maybe that's through the chat room, is it, Alexa, whatever?
Yep. So do you want me to pop them in now, Andrew?
Yeah, that'll be good. We'll go to Kate
Okay.
while you're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to second the motion. It may not be perfect, but it lets us give some direction about the consultation that we want to do, and the biggest discussion I think we want to have. Thanks, staff, for the report. And I just want to, there's one gem in there which I really think hasn't been talked about and needs to be highlighted. And maybe I'm reading it wrong, but 7% patronage increase for the youth class. That is huge. They are our future ratepayers and residents who see that we need to do something more about climate change. They are also the ones who don't have access to cheap transport, as in being able to drive. I'm really excited to see that. And it's that sort of detail that I'd like to see more clearly on which routes those are, what times of day, so that we can really start talking about what we talked about in the regional passenger transport plan, which was about being flexible and reacting to demand. So good on the young ones for getting on board, increasing their usage, and appreciating that lower fares has had a substantial increase for that group of people.
Thank you. How about we just pop into the chat room, and I just wonder, Alexa, do you want to just talk us through what you are moving and Kate is seconding?
Yeah, I'll read it out too for anyone that's watching online who may not have access to the chat. So the first part of the motion is that we note the report. There's a few things that I'd like to see in that report that we don't have, but that's okay, that can come later. But so we note this report, that we write to the DCC in Wakakatahi to invite them to participate in an independently facilitated, already public, workshop to consider a joint objective of public transport in Dunedin, and then which levers we and others can use to promote those objectives. For example, parking options and costs, timing of review of fares, with consideration of routes, usage and flexibility of services and patronage, coordination of building of planned complementary infrastructure, and coordination of travel demand management across large city businesses. There's a lot in there, and some of that comes from the regional transport plan, these things that we want to do, but it's taking that down into more detail and actually trying to get together with our partners and come up with something that we can actually work together. Kia ora, well, it hasn't been talked about in this report, Councillor Calvert, so we haven't included that at this point. This is about Dunedin fares.
Thank you. So you've moved, Kate has seconded. So discussion on the motion. Marion.
Thank you. And thank you for that work, Kate and Alexa. And also, who's that lovely man who's in charge of all this, whose name I'm now going to forget?
Gary.
Gary Maloney. Thank you for that, Gary. I'm very supportive of the motion. There's only one thing still worrying me. Well, worrying me is that, do we talk about wages? Remember, I'm worried about us having a workforce to deliver these services. Okay, and at the moment there are very disillusioned people out there because they still haven't received that money that we voted on months ago and a year ago, the living wage back pay. So and they are very distressed about that at the moment. So just a question to either of you, in there, is that is that an appropriate place, or is it just taken as read that we will care about a bus service that has got drivers? Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Gary or Gavin?
Chair, I just remind councillors that we do have a workshop coming up, which is looking at a number of operational matters. So the point that Councillor Hobbs makes can be covered there. The other thing is, if we are going to get into any discussion around the contractual, excuse me, arrangements for the living wage, then we'll need to go public excluded. But we're happy to update councillors on where that's at.
Thanks very much, Gavin, because it is a worry.
Thanks, Gavin. Michael D.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Alexa and Kate. It's good work. The thing that's missing from your second part of that motion, from my point of view, is an ongoing inter-council body to guide decisions on public transport. I've advocated this for quite a long time now, and I'd love to see it moved forward by this motion, that we have a standing working party of regional and city councillors to advise and guide on Dunedin public transport. It should have happened a long time ago. It's an idea whose time has certainly come. We know that because of the submissions that were made to us by both the Mayor and individual councillors to our regional public transport plan hearings. We know that because of informal discussions we've recently had with a good representative group from the city. Could we include in that motion, Alexa and Kate, a phrase which indicates that we want to establish a standing working group of councillors and officers to, in an ongoing way, guide decision-making by us on public transport? That's a question.
Alexa?
I think that's a great idea, Michael. I mean, the opposition to that idea has generally been that we already have Connecting Dunedin and Shaping Future Dunedin that should do this. And I know, and I feel the same as you do, that neither of those organisations actually managed to do that. And because they don't, we probably do have to do that, or at least within some of those one of those organisations, create space for this to specifically happen, these discussions specifically around guiding and designing Dunedin public transport. And I've just worded part 3 to that motion, which I'm very happy to include if Kate is, because I agree with you that the two organisations that could have something to do with designing and guiding public transport seem to have their attention elsewhere, and we can't seem to focus it here.
Yeah, to be fair, I think, Andrew, if I can just make a reaction to that, those two groups that Alexa's referred to, Connecting Dunedin City and whatever the other one was.
Shaping Future Dunedin.
That's the one, yeah. And I'm a member of that and I should know its name. But they are obsessed with the new hospital development and the impact on the one-way street system. And that's fine. That's a big issue to deal with. And they're also obsessed with the reshaping of George Street. I want to see a group which has a whole pan-Dunedin view, which takes in Mosgiel, which takes in Palmerston, which takes in Portobello, and is able to see the whole network and give us guidance and advice on how we should make our decisions, not just about fares and stuff like that, but about the whole network. That's what I want to see, and I don't think we can reasonably expect the existing linkages between the region and the city to do that. So thanks, Alexa, for being flexible. That's very good.
Can I just chip in with the feedback that we received from the informal meeting that we had with DCC councillors and staff? Certainly that was reinforced by DCC councillors that the existing entities that we overlap with. PT don't seem to have the scope or the will to consider what a standing working party would be established to do. So I think there would be support from along the road.
Yep, agreed.
Brian. Sorry. So can we just? So we've moved and seconded the first two. Is there agreement that you've added on the third recommendation, Alexa? Kate, you're comfortable with that?
I have a little problem. Is that I think we're sort of repeating part of the second part of the motion. So maybe we have a workshop first, and at that, no, it probably works. Any thoughts, anyone? Sarah, how difficult is this making it?
Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, look, I think it's fine. I understand what you're trying to achieve. Yeah, I think absolutely having a conversation is possible. It's just that it might be tricky around why it wouldn't be framed inside Connecting Dunedin, but let's have a go.
Okay, you're happy, Kate?
Brian's hand's still up.
Yes,
I think.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, I've just sort of lost everybody at the moment. Here we go. That's good. Thank God. Okay, so just going back so Kate's all good. Brian, speaking to those motion, those three.
Yeah, cool. Look, I was simply going to ask staff to see what they actually thought about this and how it compared with what they were proposing. But I suspect Sarah's already answered that. I was particularly mindful of the fact that our public transport satisfaction survey, we're currently at 94%. We must be doing something right. Like, yeah, is there a response to that? Maybe Sarah, like, I actually agree with the sentiment of what Alexa and Kate, and I like what Michael was saying about a coordinated group. So I think there's some real opportunities to do there better and to connect the parking with the bus and all this. But nevertheless, the person in the bus seems to be pretty happy, which is actually contra to what the general discussion around our table is about how bad things are. Is there a response?
Sarah?
I'm happy to respond generally, and if Gavin or Gary wants to add anything, then they should. But what I would say is, as you know, and as reported in my Chief Executive's report this time round, I met with the two Chief Executives and the Regional Manager of Ritchie's and Go Bus recently. Gavin was with me in those meetings. They were quite perplexed, to be honest, about why we would see our public transport as anything other than successful, based on the experience that they have in the rest of the country. So I think, yes, the customers are telling us something, the patronage is telling us something. We also, I think, have a sense that, not that, I don't get the sense that councillors necessarily think that the bus system is terrible. It's more that you're looking for a greater level of connectivity between our buses and the other transport and climate change challenges that we face in the community at the moment. So to my mind, this is what you're asking for, is really looking at the solution to a much bigger conversation and a bigger problem. Buses are one solution, which is why there is an important link to having conversations with people like DCC, because of the way that they influence the cost of parking charges, for example, the availability of parking, the way that local streets are managed, local roading networks. So yeah, I think on the one hand, people who ride the bus are generally happy. That's not to say that we can't strive for other things and to build on that success.
Yeah, maybe that last sentence is what it's all about. The people on the bus are currently pretty happy, but we've got other challenges: growth patronage, climate change, coordination, working together, a plan forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin.
Where does this, and I may be a wee bit off track, but where does this resolution cover what we're going to do with this $2 fare that Councillor Deaker brought up right at the start that's costing us $1 or $2?
Good question. The answer before was around there's I think $6.5 million deficit or something along those lines, and over time the targeted rates will obviously increase to recover that deficit. But your question really relates to the actual decision around the $2 fare, either continuing on. Is that right?
We're just going to carry on with that.
Yep.
And this group gets going. Is that what the plan is?
I'll go to Alexa and she's got a thumbs up. So that is the plan. So the status quo remains.
Yep, status quo, and actually it's what Gary's recommending somewhere in here. But yes, it is. The status quo remains until we do more. I mean, the big concern is the expense actually of what we're doing.
So
and Councillor Noon, is that covered off with this motion? That's what I'm trying to see.
Okay, so if we go to the
okay,
go to
see where you're at.
Yeah, so we've got the existing ones on the audit paper. We've got the additional ones. So
how about with the first one? Note the report and agree to continue with the status quo. How we should do it? Somebody that's better in writing these than me. Gary, maybe?
Yep.
So we agree to continuing with the status quo.
And we probably should state that the $2 fare or something, i.e. the $2 fare, just so that we're absolutely clear that we continue with, well, why don't we just we'll continue with that $2 fare.
Okay.
Sorry, could I just help a little bit with that?
Yes, please.
Would you, so yes, we can note the report, agree to continue with the $2 fare. Do you want to say anything about or how long or until, or you just want to continue?
We probably need to mark a place where something else is considered. So would it be until or continue with the the $2 fare pending and agree an outcome of discussions with DCC and Waka Kotahi? Is that close enough? If you manage to capture that, Liz?
Gavin.
Oh, sorry, Gavin.
That's right. Mr. Chairman, I was going to suggest maybe it's simpler just to resolve to maintain the existing fares for the Dunedin Transport Network, because it's not quite as simple as $2.
Okay.
Might be a better way of expressing status quo.
Okay. Can we just
but agree with
Mrs.
Gardner, we need this to be time bound.
Okay. Gavin, can we just make sure that Liz has got the wording of what you've just said? Can you just confirm what you've just indicated as the best way to confirm the $2 fare option?
I think it's something like maintain the existing fares for the Dunedin Public Transport Network until X, and you need to decide what X is.
Yep. So Alexa, you're talking about the pending outcome of discussions
with DCC and Waka Kotahi.
And we need to have a timeline in there. What's your
Well, I'd hope we could do it this year. So
Before the end of the calendar year.
does that sound fair, Evan, Sarah?
Well, you've just talked about annual plan for next year. This is a matter that really's got to be resolved sooner rather than later, which was the purpose of this paper. So just mindful that, you're going to get into another annual plan process, and that's just one of the factors around making this time bound.
So then we need to so that we can include outcomes in the for annual planning, which would be by end of October, wouldn't it, Gavin?
Well, it seems to me that you've got to make these other things that you are resolving happen. They have to be time bound if those are the things that drive your decisions on fares. In other words, these discussions with other parties and those other things will need to be time bound, because they are the things that have consequential effect on your fare review.
So we need to have those discussions in time for our annual planning process, which, looking at that last paper we just had, was that end of October? You'd need to know.
It's a question for Gavin.
So, well, Mr. Donnelly might be in a better position to comment on how it synchronises with the financials. All I'm saying is that's just one of the factors which makes it a no later than date.
So let's have a no later than. And Nick, can you give us some guidance on what date that needs to be?
Well, ideally, if there was going to be changes to fares, and it's the fares that we're particularly interested in, we would go out and consult on the fares when we do, the consultation piece early next year. Typically we're looking to do that around February, March, so you'd want to be having workshops and having those meetings and everything, by the end of this year, so that you could form a view on where things were going, and what you may or may not be thinking about changing or consulting on. Because at the moment, any changes to fares do need to be consulted on. And so we typically tie that in with the annual plan or LTP, whichever is going. But it's just, we actually haven't changed fares a lot over recent years, other than moving to the $2 fares. Things have stayed relatively static. So ideally by the end of this year, I think.
Okay, so we will want to be consulting on any fare changes in next year's annual plan. I'm just going back to Gary's original recommendations, which haven't actually got the time binding in there either. I think, Gary, you were thinking that we would continue with the status quo for now. So I guess we have to be ready to consult on any fare changes that come out of the discussions with DCC and Whakatahi. So those discussions be completed at the end of this year, calendar year. I mean, we're not going to be able to have them for you to have the full data in your early budgeting, I shouldn't think. Any further thoughts on how we can tidy that up? Oh, Marion's got her hand up.
Yep. I'll go to Michael D, then Marion.
Yeah, Andrew, I was just going to make the point that Gavin did, that this has got to be an annual plan topic, and we therefore have to be in a position to draft something into the annual plan for consultation by at least December the 31st, preferably earlier. So I think Alexa's on the right track. And then we'll have to face the moral dilemma of whether we encumber our ratepayers with dealing with this pit that the public transport reserve has fallen into, which is getting deeper all the time because of the $2 fare. I'm perfectly happy with the bus service. I use it a lot, but I know my neighbours do not. So my neighbours are going to have to pick up their rate bill and pay for me. And that is a dilemma for all of us. But we've got to deal with it pretty quickly, and it's got to be done in the next annual plan, in my opinion. So we're on the right track. I support it.
Marion?
I'm focused on the timelines. I think that in initial discussions following passing this motion, which I support, passing this, initial conversations with DCC, with the Mayor, with the CE, is to say that we want at least 3 meetings, one in September, one in October, one in November. So, you know, we really put the heat on DCC to begin to get a buy-in and some problem solving on both sides. And that will increase the issues that you raise quite rightly, Michael. Although you see, I don't see this as just about buses and individual bus fares. I always see this in the light of climate change and getting more passengers on. But if we could in that letter sort of say, we'll have a meeting September, October, November, and this today is August the 25th. So we really have to get moving. It becomes a priority. Thank you.
Thank you all. So, Alexa, by the sound of it, from a financial point of view, or financial planning point of view, it seems the sooner the better. And if that means we've got some sort of idea with the way the discussions pan out by the end of October, ideally, but obviously the deadline is the 31st. But we know that our conversations about our LTP, our annual plan, occur well in advance of that. So I'd like to think we target an earlier date like the 31st of October to keep the pressure on.
All right, coming up. So how about establish a standing group of councillors and officers to design and guide Dunedin public transport? This group to meet several times this year by October 31. Guide any fare consultation in the annual plan.
Okay, everyone comfortable?
Okay, I'll just pop that in the chat box with the other 2. So Liz, you'll have all 3. There it is.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. Well, good.
So Liz has that we note the report and agree to maintain the existing fares and have discussions with DCC and Whakatahi in time to include potential financial outcomes in annual planning processes prior to end of October. If I change that, that's even better, Liz.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so that would go. I won't cut and paste properly from there. Liz, can you take that one that you've sent through? I can't seem to cut and paste it properly.
Yes.
Number 1, and make that and just change prior to the end of October.
Prior to the end of October. Yep, we'll do.
And then that is a better first part of the motion.
So that's number 1 still.
That's number 1. Do we still want number 2, which invites for a facilitated workshop to consider those things?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Okay. Yeah, it's not a bad idea to us down to that.
That involves everybody, so yes.
Yeah. Okay, so now I've got 2 parts to the motion. The first part is what Liz has written in there with a minor modification. And because I can't cut and paste it, it's not doing it for me. I don't know why. And the second part is as it was, which I can cut and paste. That's the second bit. How's that, Liz? Is that clear?
Yes, that we write DDC. So that's going to replace what I've got, the ABCD. So is that the same as the other one?
No, that's the same as the old one. Yeah, that's the second. The second one.
Okay, that's the second one. And then are we still going to have number 3, which was establish a standing? No.
I don't think we need it because you've contained it in number 1, haven't you? Let's have a look.
Yes. Yes, I think having discussions with DCC and Waka Kotahi, that'll work prior to the end of October.
Oh, it doesn't say, yes, it doesn't say to establish a standing group.
No, it doesn't.
We still need to do that, to establish a standing group of councillors. Oh, that just stands on its own now. I'll put that in here. It's number 3.
Yep.
And that stands on its own, to establish a standing group of councillors and officers, design and guide Dunedin public transport. There's 3 parts. First part's noting the report and saying that we need to talk to our partners and at the end of the year. So if there's any fair changes, it goes into the annual plan. The second part is telling us that we need to have a workshop and get everybody's views there. And the third part is to establish a standing group.
I'm not happy with the word design, Alexa. We've got a perfectly good network. Review would be good, but let's not go back to a blank page for goodness sake.
Okay, I'm happy with that.
Yep.
Where is that?
And so is Kate.
In number 3.
Do you mind if I just ask a question? We've got design or review. What about enhance? Because I don't think you really want to review and then go back through all the network and all of that.
Yep, happy with that too.
Enhance would be good. Yep. Thanks, Sarah.
And that has gone in. We go, Liz.
Timing. So that is in number 2.
No, it's number 3. Establish and I've just sent it through. Establish a standing group of councillors and officers to enhance and guide Dunedin public transport. Oh God, it's still got the October 31. Sorry.
That's fine. Got it. So what was Sarah saying related to the review?
You've got it in there.
Sorry, Liz, it was just I substituted the word enhance, so it's already taken care of.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So it's now establish a standing group of councillors and officers to enhance and guide Dunedin public transport, full stop.
Now, do you mind if I pop this up and share it quickly and y'all can take a look to make sure it's what you want?
Gavin has got a comment, I think.
So, Mr. Chairman, just so I'm clear on number 3, that's a standing group of ORC and DCC councillors and officers. Is that the intention? It's
Yes, that is the intention, and write it in there, please, Gavin.
And then I just wondered if it was inviting DCC rather than simply saying you will establish it.
Probably best invite, hadn't we? Better be polite.
Yep. Good call.
All right, I'm going to share this with y'all for a minute if you want to take a look and let me know.
Thanks, Liz. Sorry, Kevin, I'll come to you in a sec.
Could you make it bigger on your screen, Liz? That'll make it easier.
Yes, I
just
should
boost
be
up,
able to.
just down on the bottom right of your screen. That's it. Beautiful. Thank you.
All good?
I'm happy.
I am.
Thank you for your efforts, everybody. Kevin.
Yeah. look, I'm agreeing with where you're heading. I'm just wondering what is the staff implication, because we're now actually rewriting probably a staff program, a work program. So have we got the capabilities of doing that, Mrs. Gardner?
Sarah.
Thanks. I'm probably not the best person to comment. I mean, obviously, yes, there are some staffing implications, and we will need to work around those. We did know that we would have to look at the $2 fare, so I think that's probably being factored into the work program. It's probably more just that there are logistics around the meetings, etc., and of course advice that will need to be prepared. So yeah, we'll come back to you if it's a problem, but at this stage, you know, I think we just need to have a look at it and figure out what it actually involves from staff effort point of view.
Thank you. Are we all set? Yep. I'll put those three motions all together. Please raise your hand if you're in favour. Against? Carried. Sorry, Carmen, I see you've got your electronic hand up. No, maybe not. Okay, cool. I see it on the screen anyway. That's cool. Okay, last item, which is 7.5 annual returns of inactive subsidiaries. This is my understanding. It's pops up every year where you're keeping some of these so-called companies that are registered. In the meantime, they may or may not be required ever in the future. So it's just a standard requirement that we are asked to resolve, that no auditors be appointed nor any AGM be required for any of the three inactive companies: Regional Services, Regional Pest Services, and Regional Monitoring Services. I'm happy to move. Seconded Kate. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. Raise your hand. Against? Carried. That concludes the Finance Committee meeting. So there's no further business. So I'll close the meeting, and it's 14 minutes past 12, and we'll see you here for the count.